He wasn't supposed to find it. The student's journal was supposed to stay closed, locked in the desk drawer where forgotten things belong. But Mr. Harrison noticed it during office hours. The leather-bound notebook, half hidden beneath scattered homework assignments, and a collection of pencils worn down to stubs. The girl, Emma, had stepped out to use the bathroom. He had 2 minutes, maybe 3. The kind of time where a man's entire moral architecture crumbles into dust. He opened it. He shouldn't have opened it. But he did. The first entry was dated 6 months ago. Neat handwriting, the kind that suggests someone trying very hard to be invisible. If anyone ever reads this, they need to know what Dad did to Mom, not just the yelling, the other thing, the thing nobody talks about. His hands went cold. The words on the page weren't accusations. They were confessions. Confessions of a daughter who had been carrying her mother's secret like a stone in her chest for half a decade. He read 3 more entries. Each one revealed another layer, another moment of violence that never made it to hospitals or police reports. The kind of truth that lives in bathrooms and locked bedrooms and the spaces between what people say at dinner and what actually happened. When Emma came back, she noticed immediately. A teacher's eyes don't lie. She saw the knowledge settling into his face like ash. She didn't ask what he'd read. He didn't ask why she'd left it visible. The contract between them was signed in that moment. The moment a man became the repository of a family's greatest shame. He closed the journal carefully as if it might shatter. He handed it back to her without a word. She took it, folded it against her chest, and said, "I needed someone to know." Those 9 words would change everything. Not immediately, not in any dramatic, visible way. But in the quiet spaces where choices are made, in the staff room during lunch, in the parking lot after school, in the darkness of his own bedroom where he would lie awake cataloging the architecture of his complicity. He knew now, knowing was a burden, and he would have to learn how to carry it alone. 6 weeks passed. The seasons began to shift from autumn toward winter, and Mr. Harrison felt the weight settling deeper into his spine with each day. He taught his classes the same way he always had. Poetry on Mondays, essays on Wednesdays, discussions about the power of narrative every Friday. His students had no idea that their teacher was drowning in a narrative of his own, a story he couldn't tell, couldn't ignore, and couldn't escape. Emma stopped coming to office hours. She attended class, participated minimally, and disappeared into the crowd the moment the bell rang. He respected that. Her silence was cleaner than his. She wasn't carrying conflicting loyalties. She wasn't a teacher bound by professional ethics, legal obligations, and the competing voices of duty. She was just a girl trying to survive in a house where silence was the family language. But Mr. Harrison was unraveling in that silence. He started making mistakes. Small ones at first. He forgot to collect assignments. He gave a quiz on material he hadn't taught. He caught himself staring at Emma during lessons, trying to decode whether she was okay, whether her mother was okay, whether the violence had continued, or if there had been some miraculous intervention that required no reporting, no intervention, no breaking of confidentiality. He began researching. Late at night, after his wife was asleep, he would sit at his computer and read about mandatory reporting laws in his state, the legal definition of abuse, the difference between the law and what actually happened in practice when teachers reported. He read testimonies from women whose cases had been dismissed. He read accounts of families torn apart when a single revelation had turned the system itself into a weapon. He read about revenge and retaliation and the statistical likelihood that calling would make things worse. The research became obsessive. It became a substitute for action. Every web page he visited was a way of maintaining the illusion that he was still making a choice, that he wasn't simply choosing inaction by researching the consequences of action. His wife noticed. "You seem distracted," she said one night over dinner. He told her he was grading papers. She didn't believe him. Wives never do. But she also didn't push. Some couples have conversations. Some couples maintain the peace through strategic avoidance. Mr. Harrison and his wife had become experts at the latter. At school, his colleague Marcus noticed too. They were friends, or at least colleagues who occasionally had lunch together. "You're not yourself," Marcus said one day in the faculty lounge. "Everything okay at home?" And there it was, the moment where everything could have changed. He could have told Marcus the truth. He could have passed the burden to someone else, shared the weight, transformed a private crisis into a professional one. Marcus was also a mandatory reporter. They could have reported together, diluting the individual responsibility into institutional protocol. But Mr. Harrison didn't do that. Instead, he smiled and said, "Just tired. End of the semester." And Marcus believed him because Marcus wanted to believe him. Because sometimes the easiest thing in the world is to accept the surface explanation, to not press deeper, to let someone else's darkness remain someone else's problem. Emma began to look worse. Mr. Harrison noticed the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders seemed to collapse inward a little more each week. She wore longer sleeves despite the warming weather. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. One day in class, during a discussion about Dostoevsky, a student asked, "But if you know someone is suffering, don't you have a moral obligation to help them?" And Emma had looked at Mr. Harrison directly. He had looked away. That was the moment he stopped being a man wrestling with a decision and started being a man who had already made one. His silence was no longer temporary. It was becoming permanent. It was becoming the kind of silence that hardens into stone, that becomes indistinguishable from complicity, that eventually becomes indistinguishable from character. Winter came early that year. The cold arrived in November, unprepared for by the city, turning the streets into a study in accumulated ice and consequences. Mr. Harrison learned that Emma's father had been promoted. A significant promotion. Corner office, six-figure salary, the kind of advancement that affirmed his success in the world. The man had a Facebook page where he posted photos of his family at Christmas parties, always smiling, always performing. Mr. Harrison looked at those photos and felt something twist inside his chest. The performances were so convincing, the lie was so complete. And somewhere in that house, in that performance, Emma was learning that the world rewards people who are good at secrets, who can maintain the fiction, who understand that survival often means enabling. The opportunity came in February. He received a call from the district's counselor, not specifically about Emma, but inquiring whether he'd noticed any students showing signs of emotional distress. It was a routine call, the kind made every semester to sensitize teachers to their mandatory reporting obligations. "If you observe anything concerning," the counselor said, "you have a legal and ethical responsibility to report it to our office. We take these situations very seriously." Mr. Harrison listened. He heard the words. He understood the message. And for a moment, a crystalline, perfect moment, he understood that there was still a choice available to him. He could hang up the phone, walk into the principal's office, and say the words he'd been rehearsing in his head for 3 months. "I have information about potential abuse." 4 words. That's all it would take. 4 words to transfer the responsibility, to activate the machinery of intervention, to stop being the silent witness and start being the agent of change. He stood in the hallway outside his classroom. His students were working on a group project. He had 15 minutes to change everything. He walked to the principal's office. He could see her through the glass walls, Principal Reeves, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for taking these matters seriously. She looked up as he approached. The moment was there. It was tangible. It was waiting. He opened his mouth. He thought about Emma. He thought about her mother. He thought about the legal system that would be activated by his report. He thought about the investigations, the interrogations, the questions that Emma would have to answer in front of strangers. He thought about her father's lawyer. He thought about the possibility that nothing would happen, that the case would be dismissed, and then they would all be trapped in an even smaller box with even higher stakes. He thought about all of this in approximately 3 seconds. Then he closed his mouth. He kept walking. He didn't stop at the principal's office. He went to the bathroom instead, and he stood at the sink and he looked at his own reflection for a long time. There was a man in the mirror. He wasn't entirely sure who that man was anymore. After that moment in the hallway, something crystallized inside Mr. Harrison. The uncertainty was gone. The wrestling was finished. He had made his choice, and now he was going to live inside it. He didn't think about Emma anymore, or rather he did, but he thought about her the way you think about an accident you see on the highway, with a moment of concern, followed by a quick compartmentalization, followed by moving on. He graded her papers fairly. He treated her professionally. He maintained exactly the right distance. She graduated that spring. He attended the ceremony because it was expected. He watched her walk across the stage, accept her diploma, and vanish into a future he would never witness or influence. He told himself that she had survived. That was the narrative he chose. She had survived, which meant his silence had not been complicity. His silence had been respect for her autonomy. His silence had been a choice not to destroy her agency by transforming her private knowledge into public record. These were the stories he told himself. Emma left for college in the fall, a good college on the East Coast. She would later block him on every social media platform, which confirmed his theory that she was fine, that she had moved on, that his silence had not hurt her because she had transcended it. He didn't allow himself to consider the possibility that she had blocked him precisely because his silence was a kind of betrayal, or that healing often involves erasing the people who witnessed your pain and did nothing about it. The years passed with the kind of remarkable speed that marks the transition from middle age toward old age. Mr. Harrison taught his classes. He collected his paychecks. He and his wife drifted further into the kind of companionable disconnection that characterizes long marriages. Two people living parallel lives in adjacent rooms, no longer quite meeting in the middle. His wife never mentioned the change she'd noticed all those years ago. Some things are not meant to be discussed. He began to notice that he was holding conversations less and less. That silence had become not just a burden he was carrying, but a fundamental restructuring of who he was as a person. The teacher who had once loved discussing literature and philosophy had become a man who preferred to eat lunch alone in his classroom. The man who had once engaged in long talks with colleagues had become someone who communicated primarily through email. He volunteered less for school committees. He attended fewer social events. He was, without consciously deciding it, withdrawing from the world, or rather, being withdrawn from it by the weight of what he wasn't saying. One day, in what would be one of his last years of teaching, a new student came to him with a question. "Mr. Harrison, I read this book where someone knew that another person was being hurt, but they didn't tell anyone, and everyone blamed them. But I don't understand. Why would they be blamed? They were just minding their own business." Mr. Harrison had looked at this student, 17 years old, idealistic, still believing that the world operated according to clear moral principles, and he had said, "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's complicated, even when you're not sure what will happen." The student had seemed satisfied with this answer. Mr. Harrison had not, because he knew what he was really saying was, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is lie to yourself, often enough and convincingly enough that you almost believe it. The silence didn't make him feel guilty anymore. Guilt requires a sense of agency, a belief that things could have been different. He had long ago surrendered that belief. He had replaced guilt with something quieter, something more like resignation. He had become a man who carried one perfectly preserved secret, and the secret had become, over time, indistinguishable from the man himself. He was no longer a teacher who knew something. He was a man made entirely of the thing he wouldn't say. 20 years later, Mr. Harrison received an email. It came from a woman named Emma, no longer a student, but a therapist, working at a private practice in Portland, Oregon. She had found him through LinkedIn or Facebook or some other digital means of resurrection. The email was professionally polite. It asked if he remembered her. Of course he remembered her. He had spent 20 years not thinking about her, which meant she had occupied at least that much real estate in his permanent consciousness. The email was kind. It said that she had thought about reaching out many times. It said that she understood he had been in a difficult position. It said that she had gone to therapy in college and that therapy had helped her understand that there were good people in complicated situations, and that not everyone who failed to report abuse was a bad person. She was, the email suggested, trying to forgive him. This, somehow, was worse than anger would have been. Anger would have validated his guilt. Forgiveness just reminded him that what he had done, or failed to do, had created a wound that had to be managed, understood, and slowly integrated into someone else's narrative. He read the email 7 times. He wrote 7 different responses and deleted 6 of them. In the end, he sent, "Thank you for reaching out. I've thought about those days often over the years, and I wish I had been braver. I'm glad you found help. You always seemed like a remarkable person." This was not the truth. The truth would have been, "I have thought about you every single day of the last 20 years. I have thought about you in my car on the way to work. I have thought about you during family dinners. I have thought about you when I was happy and especially when I was sad. Because thinking about you reminded me that happiness and sadness are luxuries available only to people who can afford not to see or who can afford to tell themselves that what they saw didn't matter. But you can't send that email. You can't send the truth. So you send something smaller, something that preserves the fiction that you had a choice and that you chose reasonable uncertainty over action." Emma responded that she appreciated his words. She said that she had not expected anything more, but that hearing even this much had been good. She said that she would like to have coffee sometime, if he was ever in Portland. She included her phone number. He saved the email. He never responded. He never called. He carried that phone number around in his head the way he carried everything else, as a permanent weight that had, over decades, become so naturalized that he sometimes forgot it was there. His retirement came. He left the classroom. He stopped seeing students every day. He had more time now, theoretically, to reflect, to process, to undergo whatever transformations middle-aged men are supposed to undergo when they stop working. But time didn't clarify anything. Time just gave the silence more room to grow. He would wake up at night sometimes, thinking about Emma's mother. He would wonder if she was okay now, if she had escaped, if she had built a different life. He would wonder what she would say if she knew that her daughter's secret had been read by someone and then filed away like unpaid bills. He would think about the fact that her suffering had been visible, had been documented, had been witnessed, and then methodically ignored. And he would turn over in bed and try to go back to sleep, because that was the luxury his silence had purchased, the ability to set the thoughts aside when he was tired. On quiet mornings now, in the years after his retirement, Mr. Harrison sometimes sits on his back porch and thinks about what it means to become a living vessel for someone else's pain that you never consented to carry. He thinks about how silence is sometimes mistaken for mercy, and how inaction is sometimes mistaken for respect for someone's autonomy. He thinks about the fact that Emma had reached out with forgiveness, which meant that somewhere inside her, she had decided that his failure had become tolerable enough to acknowledge. But he also knows that you do not reach out to forgive someone unless the hurt has calcified into scar tissue, unless the wound has become part of your permanent architecture. His silence had done that. His silence had written itself into her DNA. Every choice she made afterward had to be understood in the context of this, that the adults in her life had known and had done nothing. The silence had not protected her. It had simply delayed her access to help, had forced her to build that help privately, in rooms with paid professionals, at an age when she should have been able to just be a teenager. Sometimes he wonders what Emma's life would have been different if he had been the kind of man who could speak. Would her mother have escaped sooner? Would Emma have been spared years of fear? Or would the intervention have simply restructured the trauma into a different shape, with him as a new kind of villain in a story that didn't need any more villains? He doesn't know, and he has learned that not knowing is a kind of mercy. It allows him to maintain both narratives simultaneously, the one where his silence was devastating, and the one where his silence was the only wise choice. He has become very good at holding both truths. This is what silence teaches you, not how to be strong, but how to be flexible enough to survive in the space between what you know and what you can bear to say about it. Every silence in this world is carrying someone's secret. Every person who knows and doesn't speak is building a monument to their own survival, a structure made of good intentions, impossible dilemmas, and the slow erosion of their own moral infrastructure. Mr. Harrison taught literature for 30 years. He taught about redemption and transformation and the power of truth. But he never taught the most important lesson, which is that knowing something and speaking something are not the same thing, and that sometimes the most profound damage we do to the people around us is not through cruelty or betrayal, but through the careful maintenance of a silence we convince ourselves is kindness. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of a moment when you knew something and couldn't figure out how to make it true in the world, subscribe to The Silent Truth and tell us in the comments. Tell us about the secrets you're carrying. Tell us about the moments when you understood that speaking and staying silent both came with costs you weren't entirely prepared to pay. Because everyone in the world is Mr. Harrison. Everyone is standing in that hallway, 15 minutes before something that could be different. And almost everyone is choosing to keep walking.